All right, Larry Fletcher, you are on Driven to Ride. Thanks for being here, sir.
Awesome to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and you're just down the road in Chicago, which is super cool. But we had some the cold and flus going around, so decided to record it remotely. But you've got an awesome looking background
Thanks.
back there, so I'm kind of happy we did it this way.
Yeah. This is like I said, I've the whole family came down with the whatever's going around. So it's best to keep everybody safe. I feel better now, but just keep you out of the germ area here, the hazard
Yeah,
zone.
I appreciate it. I'm trying to avoid it. So, but let's start from the beginning. What do most people kind of know you for? What would you say is your claim to fame?
Well, pretty much the motorcycle in Chicago. I do a ton of motorcycle events. So, the motorcycle guy, is kind of, which has been used many times, but that's kind of what I hear a lot because I've been doing motorcycle events in Chicago since the mid 90s, basically. So, um, around the scene here in Chicago, that's what people know me for.
Okay,
Really.
and is
Yeah.
is Chicago your native home or?
No, I'm from Wisconsin originally. Germantown, just north of Milwaukee, is my home turf. I've been down here since the early '80s. Basically, I relocated to Chicago.
Okay. Yeah, you're in good company. We've talked to Peter Egan of Madison
Sure, absolutely.
and Bridget McCutcheon. I'm not sure if you're familiar with who she is,
Yeah.
but she is like right on the border of I think Minnesota and Wisconsin. So,
Okay. Yeah.
and I got a soft spot for Wisconsin. I used to go up there all the time as a kid.
Right.
I had some family that had a cabin way up in Eagle River, so I've been
Oh yeah. Yep. I've been
all
up there
over
many
America's
times.
fairyland. So,
Yeah.
yeah, and some great riding roads too, actually. So,
Yeah. There's really some good riding up there for sure.
did you learn to ride up in Wisconsin or after you got down here?
Actually, I started in Wisconsin because I grew up in Germantown. I basically grew
Yeah.
up right next to like motorcycle trails, like
Okay.
the
Yeah.
woods. So my buddies, mini bikes, dirt bikes was kind of the rage, you know, building jumps, and doing silly stuff that, you don't see too often anymore without helmets and gear. But yeah, just being crazy youth, on motorcycles, dirt bikes, back in like the late '60s and early '70s, mid '70s in Chicago, or I'm sorry, in Germantown is where I
Yeah.
kind of and then when I moved to Chicago, I was off of bikes for a while, but then I got back into it again. When I got close to 30, I think it was. I figured out what a great way to commute instead of dealing with this horrendous traffic sometimes. So bikes was an easier way to get around, and I love getting back in the saddle again. It was great.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. So it sounds like you really didn't start like street riding until you were an adult.
No, yeah, no, I didn't start street riding until I was almost 30, basically.
Okay.
Yeah,
And is it just because of the commute thing, or was there something that kind of got you back into it, or?
yeah. I mean, I worked in the clubs back in those days. Me and some of my buddies were riding, and
Mhm.
we had affinity for motorcycles. So I bought an old Triumph. I think back in like '89. I think was when I got back into riding, and I
Okay.
bought an old Triumph Bonneville from the shop over on off of Western in Chicago. Like this old biker dude, kind of from the bike, similar from Bike Riders fame. He was definitely old school
Yeah.
from those days, and he had an old Triumph Bonneville, and we got the thing running, and that's kind of how I got back on bikes again, was riding vintage bikes.
Okay. Is that kind of what like that moment that you were hooked on riding motorcycles, or was that maybe back on from the dirt bike days?
I definitely missed it, and I
Yeah. Yeah.
once I got back on again, I was like, yeah, what have I been missing? It's so, and I really love old bikes. I'm super into old motorcycles, and I've always been a fan. So
Yeah.
it was like the timing was right, and like I said, I did use it to use kind of vintage bikes, old Triumphs, and bunch of other bikes too that I kind of used them as commuter bikes when I was younger, to get around town, and it was just was that much easier to navigate Chicago
Yeah.
on a
Yeah. For sure.
motorcycle. Yeah,
Yeah, if you can get around cars, and I'm just picturing like a one-way street in a residential area. You've got like or both sides of the street completely full with cars, and somebody's coming one way and you're coming the other way. It's way easier to get around on a motorcycle.
exactly, exactly. Yeah,
So
I had an old Trump Bonneville. I think it was a '65. It had TT pipes on it. It was a total screamer. So my neighbors weren't a huge fan, but it was a lot of fun to ride around. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So you said you were working in the clubs. Are you talking about like dance clubs, bar clubs? Or are you talking about motorcycle clubs?
No, I worked in bars. Basically, I worked. It
Okay.
even goes back all the way to in Milwaukee. When before I moved to Chicago, I worked at a nightclub called Park Avenue, which
Hmm.
was called the nightclub. It was basically a disco because this goes back to, like I said, I think in 1981, 82.
Sure.
And then when I moved to Chicago in the later 80s, I worked at a bunch of clubs. I worked at Cairo, China Club, Kaboom, Crowbar. Kind of made the rounds. I was kind of friends with
Okay.
the club owners, and that scene was really cool because a lot of people were riding back in those days. Um, so there always were lots of bikes at the bars and clubs, and it was cool to commute on bikes back in those days. So yeah, so I worked at a bunch of, like I said, Chicago bars basically.
Okay, yeah, yeah, and the reason I ask is because I know you got, or maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong. Did you like start a motorcycle club in Chicago, or did you join it and you were like a founding member?
We started it. Well, yeah, it started basically. The 59 Club is a UK club, English
Okay.
club. It goes back to the rocker era of England in the like the 50s and 60s, and
Hmm.
it was actually a charity club founded by a father called Father Bill Shergold, and he started the 59 Club back in
Okay.
1959. And so it was kind of a motorcycle club for rockers, like the mods and rockers of Quadrophenia fame. And
Sure.
so I started up a Chicago chapter in 95 or 96. Yeah. And it was basically a vintage bike club,
Okay.
so, and we were, official chapter of the 59 Club England. And so, we paid our dues to England and got our badges and patches and stuff like that. And all like proceeds would go to children's charities in England. So it was
Okay.
pretty cool. Yeah, it was kind of neat.
Yeah.
And later
Is
on, we evolved into the Ton Up Club Chicago in
okay.
2005, which is there's chapters all over the world of the Ton Up Club, and it's very similar. It's kind of dedicated to vintage motorcycling, British bikes, European bikes, and kind of like rocker mateship, working on your rides, riding stuff like that. So the Tunnel Club is still going strong, and it is, like I said, it's dedicated to kind of like the vintage scene to a certain
Yeah.
extent.
So it sounds like when you rediscovered your love for motorcycles, you kind of jumped in with like both feet and just didn't look back.
I pretty much did. Yeah, it was kind of you could say, it took, once I got that on that Triumph, basically things kind of went from there, and it was nonstop. There's been hundreds of bikes since then. I
Oh,
mean,
geez.
I've been through many motorcycles. I still have some vintage bikes, but I like to find bikes, restore them with my friends, get them on the road. I ride them for a while and I see something else I like, and so I kind of like cycle through, kind of to a certain extent,
Sure.
because I want that experience of trying
Sure.
different bikes. And you only have limited garage space in Chicago, so
Right.
you can't keep everything. But yeah, riding vintage bikes around Chicago has been kind of like what got me into, everything else basically
Yeah.
in my life
Well, and
later on.
it sounds like you've been riding vintage bikes since like before it was even cool to do so. I mean, I know there's a huge resurgence in, in vintage bikes now, and there has been for like the last, I don't know, 15, 20 years or so, and you can see it in design cues from modern manufacturers and stuff. But what drew you to the vintage bikes? Because I mean, not to date either of us, but they were vintage back in the day too. So
Exactly. Well, I think it's because I grew up on it. I mean, my family, my dad particularly was like a Steve McQueen fan, and I
sure.
don't have to explain to you the connection there. And with Triumph, and then obviously when I was growing up, just seeing like Marlon Brando in The Wild One, or Steve McQueen in On Any Sunday, and even like Clint Eastwood in Coogan's Bluff, but movies like that, Triumphs were kind of king. Even Evil
Yeah.
Knievel, when Evil Knievel started, before he switched to Harley, he even had his big crash on a Triumph at Caesar's Palace in '67 or '68. So, it seems like all the cool kids rode Triumphs back then. So,
Yeah.
I definitely, being in the club scene in Chicago, I wanted to be one of the cool kids. So,
Yeah.
they kind of fit there. So, and the whole rocker thing was cool too, because, they like to put studs and patches and, stuff on their bike. Had a lot of flair
Yeah.
on your leathers when you were a rocker. So,
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like proto punk.
yeah,
It's very like
exactly.
DIY, all that kind of stuff. Um, for um, somebody who maybe doesn't know the context of what we're talking about with mods versus rockers and the history of that kind of 60s cafe racer, vintage bike stuff. Can you kind of give like a brief history of the mods versus rockers and where this kind of like aesthetic and biker scene, kind of comes from?
Yeah, I mean, it's cool. It in England in the basically post-war England, basically in the 50s. Um, it was kind of post-war austerity. They're teenagers of those days. They wanted to be mobile, so
Sure.
the rockers gravitated, which were the British bikers. They definitely gravitated towards like the British motorcycles, which were the king in the day. The
Hmm.
Triumphs, Nortons, BSAs, Vincents, all that stuff. Those were homegrown bikes for them, and they could get their hands on them cheap. And so rockers, basically, you could get in England. They had like two different license requirements. It was like, I don't know, 250cc and lower and above.
Sure.
So you could start on a Triumph Cub or a BSA Bantam, and then work your way up
Hmm.
to like a Bonneville or a Commando. But so the rockers were the bikers, and then the mods came from kind of a different school. Um, they were into the Vespas and Lambrettas, and they were definitely influenced by um, kind of like, they called it Northern Soul in England, but rhythm and blues music.
Oh,
Um,
sure.
and they like to dress the part. It's really cool how both cultures, rockers and mods, were influenced by World War II. Um,
Hmm.
like the rockers' uniform was basically um, a flyer's jacket from World War II. They
Oh, sure.
took the and the mods wore the parkas. They were like Korean War Army surplus,
Hmm.
stuff that kids, the younger generation, get inexpensively. And so they were basically wearing Army surplus clothing to ride their stuff. And a lot of that stuff was created in World War II for flyers, or even for parcel delivery bike motorcycle riders and things like that. So they kind of adopted that culture. So you basically had
Yeah.
two different cultures. You had the mods who were into rhythm and blues and Northern Soul, and the rockers who were into Chuck Berry and Elvis. They dressed differently. They hung out at different places. And they kind of had a legendary clash in Brighton in
Okay.
1964 over the bank holiday, where a bunch of mods and rockers, descended on Brighton, which is like a seaside town in southern England. And there's, kind of created a little bit of a riot between the rival factions. And
Interesting.
yeah, and it depicted in the movie Quadrophenia. If you ever seen the movie Quadrophenia by The Who, it
Right.
came out in the late 70s, but it was about kind of that bank holiday clash of the mods and rockers in 1964. So
Hmm.
it's kind of a cool culture, and
Yeah.
it reflects back to the vintage bikes. They weren't vintage then, but when you're riding vintage bikes, and it's interesting how the rocker culture, their whole thing was customizing their motorcycles,
Sure.
and that whole custom culture that blew up in the, I would say, the early 2000s. And first it
Hmm.
was cafes. Cafe
Yeah.
racers were huge.
Yeah.
I would say for 8 to 10 years, and then it kind of went to bobbers and choppers, and that's still
Yeah.
really big, like kind of like the Born Free, chopper scene. And
Hmm.
it's interesting to see how it's evolved. And but it all goes back to like the 50s. It's even the chopper scene goes back to Easy Rider and that whole
Yeah.
thing. And now with that great movie, The Bike Riders, that came out last year,
Hmm.
that was based, in Chicago. The scene, the photos, the book by Danny Lyons, and the movie The Bike Riders was based in Northern Illinois and Chicago. So it goes back to that 60s biker culture that kind of turned into the whole chopper bobber scene.
Yeah.
So everything, that's old is new again, it seems,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
the
History.
culture. Yeah,
Yeah. History doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it rhymes.
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So,
But it's cool, through all the
uh,
years of motorcycling, you see the ebbs and flows, and things become popular, go down, come back. And I've seen that kind of over the last 20 years in the
yeah.
scene.
Yeah. Um, so going from being passionate about it and starting clubs, or starting chapters and, you said hosting events. You've got a little event that you put on for what, about 20 years.
Yeah.
How did that get started? Tell me all about it.
Well, we were doing, I was doing bike shows in the 90s. We were doing like vintage and we call them like vintage classic and classic motorcycle shows.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
we started pretty small, get 100 bikes, couple hundred bikes, basically at a pub, and kick tires, and drink
Yeah.
pints, and it just kind of evolved. It first became called, it was called Mods versus Rockers Chicago, And
Okay.
in 2005, that was when we started that event. And it was just basically a street fest. We did it commando style where we just kind of took over the street. But as it grew and got bigger, we basically had to close off streets and put up stages. And so for about 9 years, we did mods versus rockers. And then kind of I explained to you how the scene was changing from cafe racers to choppers and bobbers and hot rods. We
Yeah.
decided to rebrand it as Motoblot, which is kind of like encompasses all things moto.
Sure.
Whatever you're into, internal combustion motor, or even now with electric,
Yeah.
see
Oh,
anything
sure.
on two wheels, we embrace it. So
Yeah.
Motoblot's been going on since 2014, and this is going to be our 12th year for Motoblot in
Okay. Awesome.
Chicago. And it's a motorcycle and hot rod street festival, with tons of
Sure.
music and vendors, and that's what we
Yeah.
do here in Chicago.
So where does the term motoblot come from?
It's interesting. It goes back to my Ton Up Club history.
Oh, okay.
Um, they're the London chapter did an event and still does an event every winter called Winter Blot.
Okay.
And the term blot is a Norse pagan word
Okay.
for
Sure.
it. It means a gathering with sacrifice. So blot blot is basically a pagan word for like a party, basically. And
Okay.
so
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
we
Yeah.
just thought it was, so they kind of started it first. And I'm like, hey, when I was thinking about, changing from mods versus rockers, I like the whole blot philosophy. So I talked to
Mhm.
those guys. I'm like, hey, I think I'm going to steal your idea. And they're like, go for it. So we
Yeah,
started
man.
calling it Motoblot in 2014.
Mhm.
Meaning it's just a gathering of the tribes, basically.
Yeah. So it sounds like it's really kind of grown from that original mod versus rockers vintage classic thing into all kind of, like you said, everything and hot rods. I mean, how has it grown over time? Has it been like kind of a step by step thing, or is it like one year that it just blew up and it's been big ever since?
It's really been great. It has been gradual to a certain extent. It keeps getting
Mhm.
bigger every year, um, and we've been adding bigger bands and more entertainment and more vendors, and so it just went from basically one block to like 5 blocks when
Oh, geez.
as a
Okay.
street festival. So just as more people and there was more interest from vendors and sponsors, it just kind of grew from there. So we just
Yeah.
needed more space to do mini bike races and to do whatever we decided we wanted to do that year for fun. We just needed more space to evolve. So that's kind of where it came from.
Yeah. So what is it now? I mean, you said it's like a couple of blocks. Like that's no small feat, man.
Well, no, in 2025, we're making a big change. We're moving it from a street festival where it was at Cobra Lounge and Fulton Street, and we're moving
Mhm.
to a venue called the Salt Shed, which
Okay.
is an indoor outdoor music festival area. It was the old Morton Salt factory refinery. How it
Yeah,
was
I was gonna ask.
on
Yep.
the Chicago River. It's kind of, the building itself is iconic. It's been on the Chicago River. Like when you took I-94 into Chicago, you would see the Morton Salt like shed building, to
Yeah.
your left as you're going into downtown Chicago, and it was
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right on the Chicago River. So a couple years ago, it was repurposed as this kind of indoor outdoor music festival facility, um,
Mhm.
and it's got all the infrastructure. Doing the street fest was difficult, because you had to bring in everything. You had to close the street, set up the stages, and it was just, and it was very difficult and exhausting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this salt shed opened up a couple of years ago, and I've been kind of eyeing it. And the neighborhood that Motoblot has been changing. It's been getting
Mhm.
gentrified, and a lot of the property is for sale on that where it was now, and
Sure.
it's going to get purchased, and it's going to be a construction zone, if not this year, next year. So
Yeah.
the writing was kind of on the wall that we needed to make a move,
Mhm.
and that's when we talked to our new friends at the Salt Shed.
That's
So
cool, man. Yeah,
yeah,
that's cool.
yeah. So
Well, what can somebody expect from like going to their first motoblot? Like, full disclosure, I've wanted to go. I've not been able to go because I've had other things that I've had to travel for or whatever. But I'm stoked about coming through this year. So, what can we expect like as somebody who's never been to motoblot before?
well, it's pretty much. I mean, if you're into motorcycles and hot rods and so, and the fashion and the music, and it kind of brings that all together.
Hmm.
We have a riding element, so we're gonna have some of the streets around the salt shed closed for motorcycle parking. Plus, we'll have we'll have a ride and motorcycle show in the salt shed, as well as kind of a curated custom motorcycle show and vintage show. So all kinds of motorcycles. If you're interested in showing a bike, for instance, when you buy a ticket, you can register a bike to show
Okay.
or to bring into the event. But
Yeah.
we basically have moto vendors, tons of great music, obviously a custom motorcycle show, a ride-in motorcycle show. We usually have some kind of stunt entertainment every year, or mini bike racing, or some kind of interactive fun could be had
Yeah.
also. So yeah, no, it's basically a street festival, motorcycle festival, um, you know, in
Yeah.
Chicago, urban festival, which is kind of unusual, like that it's in downtown Chicago and it's it embraces the moto culture. It's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
Well, and I mean, from what you mentioned, from like the bike riders and a lot of other stuff. I mean, Chicago does have a pretty rich motorcycle history, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, oh yeah, it does. It's exactly that. I think the bike riders is a good example, but it does have a good history. I mean, there used to be Santa Fe Speedway. I don't know if that rings a bell to you, but it goes back.
Hmm.
It was the dirt track, oval track on the south side of Chicago, where like all the legends from the '60s and '70s and the '80s, raced there. Gary Nixon and Gene Romero and all the
Hmm.
on any Sunday crowd. That was the Chicago. Um, that was the Chicago connection, and it was a little bit depicted in the Bike Riders that those
Hmm.
guys, like the club from the Bike Riders, they wanted a motorcycle race, and that's where they
That's right.
raced. They raced at Santa Fe Speedway. That was one of the race tracks. So that
Hmm.
was kind of a Chicago legend area. Unfortunately, I think it's been gone since the late '80s, but that was a big part of Chicago culture, motorcycle
Yeah.
culture.
Um. So the other thing is that putting on Motoblot isn't even your full time job, right?
No,
So
no.
it's something you do on the side, it seems like, or as part of, something to do. What is your full-time gig?
Currently, I'm working, and I have been for a long time. I've been working for Royal Enfield motorcycles,
Okay.
which is obviously the iconic brand from the UK. Um, that was in Redditch, England since
Hmm.
1901. It's actually the
Wow.
longest continuously manufactured motorcycle company in the world.
That's cool.
I think Harley is 2000 or is 1902, and Indians 1901 too, but they have not been continuously manufactured. They went out,
Right.
came back, went out, came back.
Hmm.
But Royal
Hmm.
Enfield, they went through a lot of lean years, but but motorcycles are still coming from India. They're manufactured in India,
Right.
and the Royal Enfield Bullet lasted. Was originally manufactured in the late 1930s, and that
Hmm.
design was manufactured just up until recently. Like it's kind of the longest continuously manufactured motorcycle.
Yeah, that's cool.
They
Yeah.
made change. They brought in EFI and disc brakes, and they modernized it. But over the last 10 years, they just built new factories and have completely modernized and are really leading the way in the middleweight motorcycle market worldwide
Hmm.
with what they're doing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they've got some cool new designs out over the last couple of years. I've seen, the prices are relatively reasonable too. I've
right.
noticed compared to some other manufacturers. Not to knock anybody, but
No, that's their
that's
sweet
always
spot. Yeah,
yeah.
they want to compete in the middleweight market, and they're in that 4,000 to $7,000 range right now,
Hmm.
with a 3-year warranty, and they're making all kind. They're making the Himalayan, which is a great dual purpose bike, and
Hmm.
obviously the Interceptor and the GT, and they've just come out with a bunch of new models. They're famous for their 350 singles, and
Yeah.
they've got like it's a great introductory bike. It's inexpensive. Um, it's high quality and it comes with a great warranty. So it's it's a good place to be. And with the economy right now, it's kind of it's a good spot to be. Because
Yeah. Yeah.
it makes it easier to get onto a bike, and
Yeah.
less painful. Um, that's for sure.
Well, and I'm kind of the camp too that, you know, obviously there's all kinds of motorcycles you can get used, new, whatever. But I feel like with a new or even like a relatively new bike, you don't have as many problems. You don't have to deal with maintenance as much. If somebody wanted to get into motorcycling, it's like, let's just make it easy. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
exactly.
So, so I like where your head's at with that. But
Yeah, exactly.
I know you've worked for another. British motorcycle manufacturer as well, correct?
Yeah. I was with Triumph back in the I think 2012, 13, 14 in that era. Yeah.
Okay.
So I worked for Triumph. I became affiliated with Triumph because they were sponsoring Mods versus Rockers.
Okay,
Um,
cool.
and so I got to know the people at Triumph. Um, great folks, and they embraced Mods versus Rockers because it fit their brand.
Yeah.
And through getting to know them, they brought me on board actually as a historian for the brand and also working in marketing. So I had a lot of fun. I was in Daytona. I think it was 2013, and it was the first time that Triumph won Daytona since like Gary Nixon won it in '67
Oh
or
wow.
'68. It was Danny Eslick won on obviously on a new Triumph, and it was great to be there for that because it was the first time in 50 years or whatever. I
Yeah.
can't remember what it was, but it was super
Yeah.
cool to see Triumph come. I mean, obviously Triumph's been back since the late '80s with John Blor's reiteration of Triumph.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, they're a great iconic brand. It
Yeah.
was really fun to work for them.
Yeah. I remember the first Triumph I rode was a 2014 Thruxton.
Yes.
And I was riding. It was like a day test ride, and I rode it all through like the suburbs of Chicago. Kind of my
Awesome.
stomping grounds. It's
Yeah.
like, man, this thing is cool. Like, I don't have the garage space for it, but if I did,
Yeah. Well,
so
it's funny. Yeah, that bike is actually a total throwback to the rocker era
yeah,
of
yeah,
Britain. Well, Thruxton's actually obviously it's named after a raceway in
hmm
England, but that cafe racer style is basically guys took Triumphs and they made them into cafe racers, and
yeah.
that's what they were doing in the '60s. So that's cool. It was that Thruxton was they just discontinued that model. I was like, what are they
I
doing?
know it's bummed about that. I was like, wow, I see. Maybe I can sneak one into the garage before
Yeah,
because they're not making them anymore.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
um, but so I don't know. I think like having the job title of historian for Triumph is probably one of the coolest job titles I've heard. What even went into that job? Like,
Well,
what was your like job? Like, what did you do?
well,
Like, for lack of a better term.
it was cool. It was like I said because I got to know the marketing people at Triumph North America, and I already had a relationship with like Gary Nixon and Gene Romero and some of the old racers from that era
Hmm.
because I was always been into motorcycle racing, so I'd be going to the races, at Mid Ohio or wherever I could go to check out racing. And a lot of those guys were still racing into the '80s and '90s.
Hmm.
So when I met the Triumph, they knew that I basically had a pretty good education on Triumph, the historical nature. So they basically they wanted me to be a part of marketing and events, but they wanted me to help with the you know, historical nature of bringing it to current with what they're doing with
Hmm.
bikes now and how people could relate. It was interesting when the Triumph first came back in 1989 or 90, they didn't embrace their history. They were
Oh,
like,
really?
well, they thought that their history was, bad electrics, leaky bikes, um,
Yeah,
you
I
know,
could understand
all
that.
the
Yeah.
stuff that British bikes kind of got known for, or even British cars for that matter, or Lucas Electrics. And anyway,
Yep.
they felt that was a detriment, but they didn't. I'm not sure if they understood the brand loyalty that people really had to Triumph.
Sure.
Um, and that's the same thing with Royal Enfield. I mean, Royal Enfield went through the same thing. It was
Yeah.
they were the bikes were not they were frowned upon as not being very reliable or leaky but the fact is if they were properly maintained and properly built that they were great bikes.
Sure.
But so Triumph, I think they didn't come out with that new Bonneville until like the late '90s.
Hmm.
They didn't
Yeah.
even, I mean, and that became their number one bike pretty fast after they came out with it. Once they decided to embrace their history, um, I think that really helped with sales. And you can see
Yeah, for
the
sure.
whole modern classics has become
Hmm.
huge, and Triumph really kind of led the way to a certain extent with that when they brought back the Bonneville and then added the Thruxton and other bikes
Hmm.
to the range. But that's kind of how the historian thing came because it was kind of when they were embracing their history and they wanted people in marketing that knew the history to a certain extent
Yeah,
and could talk the talk. So
that's cool, man.
I think
That's
that's where it
yeah,
came from. It's
yeah. I
just
saw that. I'm like, man, historian for Triumph. Like that's super cool. So, I'm a big fan of history and stuff, and and you can combine like two things you like together, it makes it even better. So,
yeah, it was cool.
um,
It was cool in like I think it was 2002. It was the 100th anniversary of Triumph.
hmm
They did a ride across. It was called Triumph Across America, And
Oh,
they,
wow. Okay.
yeah, they
Yeah.
did a ride from Baltimore, which is where Tricor was the Triumph Importer was in Baltimore. And then there was
Okay.
also
Sure.
the Johnson Motors was the West Coast Triumph
Hmm.
Importer. So they did a ride from Baltimore to Pasadena because that's where those
Oh,
places
wow.
are. And it was called Triumph Across America. And this is before I worked for them, but I had
Yeah.
a what was a new Bonneville then, like a 2002 Bonneville. And I rode basically across, and there's hundreds of people on this ride. We went from like
That's
dealership
cool.
to dealership, and we ended
Yeah.
up in Pasadena. And they had this huge party, and they had Gary Nixon and Gene Romero and Bud Eakins, who was,
Hmm.
he had a Triumph dealership, and he was a friend of Steve McQueen's, and so all these
Right.
great people. A lot of them are gone now, actually,
Hmm.
but back
Hmm.
then they were all at this event, which was awesome to see all those
That is
people
cool.
and kind of embrace the brand that
Yeah.
Triumph was.
Have you been able to go to England and like kind of experience the old British like bike culture firsthand, or
Oh
no?
yeah, yeah. I was over there. Actually, I went over there maybe 10 years ago. When I told you about the '59 Club, it's still in
Hmm.
existence, and Father Graham Hullett was running the club for many years. He passed away, and they did a memorial ride for Father Graham Hullett, and it was
Hmm.
from uh, in Paddington, where the '59 Club was. We had like hundreds of rockers riding through London, and we went across Chelsea Bridge, by the Battersea Power Station, the Pink Floyd album
Yeah.
cover.
Yeah. 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 Yep.
And so it was called a Rockers Run, for Father Graham Hullett. So we had hundreds. So I got to actually ride in England. I was lucky enough to get on a Triumph demo and take and do the ride and do the whole rocker thing. And it's
Yeah.
amazing. Obviously, they've got the Ace Cafe in London. They've got the Bike Shed. Um, they've got some amazing motorcycle history in the UK.
Yeah.
So it's a great place to go and check it out.
Yeah. We've talked to, I don't know if you're familiar with TJ Adams and Arthur Coldwell's. They run Ultimate Motorcycling.
Oh, okay, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and they met in like the 70s, like during like the golden age of British motorcycling. And they were talking about, yeah, we just take our bikes and on a Friday, we'd run as fast as we could to the channel and get on the last ferry and then just ride all over Europe. And I'm like, do you guys even know how awesome that sounds? Like you guys just had it
right,
made, like ride all
yeah,
over England and to all over continental Europe. It was pretty cool to hear about just that magical time in motorcycling, even if you weren't there. So,
yeah, exactly.
um, what it sounds like really like a big part of your passion for motorcycles is being in clubs and kind of having a community. Where did that kind of come from?
It's interesting to say, but you're right. It's like part of it is like having a place to ride with like-minded enthusiasts.
Hmm.
Um, we want to, I think bikers like to kind of hang out in groups and
Yeah.
ride in groups. There's something to really be said for that group ride, which is so cool. Like one of the things I do, I organize the Chicago DGR, Distinguished Gentleman's Ride,
Oh
and
yeah.
I've
Yeah.
been
Yeah. Yeah.
doing that for years, and it's great camaraderie, getting people together, and the
Yeah.
Distinguished Gentleman's Ride's a fantastic cause. Um, it's done all over the world on the same day,
Hmm.
and it's embraced, and I think it's been going on for over 10 years now. But I mean, it's the same thing. It's people, guys that have bikes, they want to hang out and they want to bench race and they want to, talk bikes and to give them a place to do that, a place to go, a place to hang out and be with like-minded, people that love bikes.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing behind the bike nights that I do in Chicago too. It's just a thing to do, get out, hey, it's Motorcycle Mondays. Let's get on,
Hmm.
let's go over and kick some tires and talk bikes, so
Yeah.
it's kind of bringing the scene together to a certain extent. And it probably comes from my bar experience and club experience. Cause I, uh, I kind of developed, the love of doing motorcycle events from being in clubs and stuff like
Hmm.
that,
Yeah.
being the dance clubs of the, '80s. And it's just, you just bring, it's a niche. It's a micro niche of people,
Yeah.
but that are like-minded enthusiasts basically.
Yeah. No, I feel you. And how like you've obviously had a lot of experience in like motorcycle clubs and organizations. Um, how does somebody that like isn't part of a club like that? What's the best way for somebody to start to get involved in something like that?
It depends where you are, but you definitely
Hmm.
connect, find out where the local kind of, every city's got their local meetups and
Sure.
things like that. I mean, now the Moto Social, I'm sure you've heard the Moto Social is a big thing.
Hmm.
internationally, and those happen in cities all over the world. But it kind of depends where you are and find that. And if you don't know, you can go to your local, bike shop or talk to the people at the dealerships and, hey, what's going on in this town? Like,
Yeah.
where can I go to hang out? In Chicago, we do Motorcycle Mondays once a month. It's the first Monday of the month, and it's at a place called O'Donovan's, and they got a big parking lot. Each month we do a different country of origin. So
Oh,
like
okay. Yeah.
so May, like the first Monday of May is always German night. And the reason we do it because the weather can be horrible in early May in Chicago. It can
Yep.
be 40 degrees or it can be 80 degrees. You don't know.
And
But
it's probably raining. Yeah.
yeah, but the BMW, like the BMW Owners Club guys, they ride no matter what, man. They got
Yeah. They
the
don't care.
gear, they got the heated grips. They're good to go no matter what.
Yeah.
So each month we do a different. Like June is British, July is American because we do it right around the 4th of July. But each month we do a different country. But that gives a chance for people who have different motorcycles of country of origin, like Italian bikes, Japanese bikes. They can all
Sure.
show up and kind of have camaraderie within their circle of bikes. They're all riding similar stuff. It's kind of cool to see all those bikes together in one spot.
Yeah. Yeah. For
Vintage and
sure.
modern, and we give out a trophy, for the most popular bike of that month, that night. Just a reason that, like I said, it's another reason to get together and kick tires and have fun.
Yeah. For sure. Well, between all of this like event planning, the Distinguished Gentleman's Ride, obviously Motoblot, the monthly meetups that you're doing, plus your full time job, do you ever get a chance to like go take any travel like trips on a motorcycle or do any touring, or you keep it pretty local?
I mean, I do when I can, but you're right. I've luckily through my job, I ride a
Yeah,
lot.
that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, I do most of the national events. Like
Hmm.
this last year, we went to the Smoky Mountain Bike Week down near Asheville,
Yeah,
and we got to ride every day these amazing roads, right?
I was gonna say that's a beautiful area that I don't feel like a lot of people know
Yeah,
about.
it's like Blue Ridge Parkway and the Appalachian Trail, and I
Hmm.
mean, it's just amazing riding, and it's part of my job. And we were doing basically extended demo rides, so people could sign up, and it was like a 3 hour ride instead
Oh
of
wow,
like
okay,
going for like a 20-minute ride. It was
yeah,
actually we rode like it was basically a 3 hour ride. So we were doing so that's what that's what I was doing. Um, Basically, and so I've got that opera. I mean, we do demo rides all over the, Royal Enfield. We're all over the country and
hmm
at national events. So I do a lot of my riding, but when I do get home and I do have a chance to ride with my friends, it is fun to do that. But I am pretty busy. Most weekends they keep me busy, right?
sure,
But at least I'm riding motorcycles, right? So
yeah, yeah. So I mean, you've got a family and wife and kids and stuff. Are they into the motorcycles at all? Have you kind of passed it on to the next generation, or are they like, oh, dad's just doing his thing?
well, my wife was a rider when I met her, basically, and
Oh, cool.
yeah, so I got her a BSA Victor, 441 Victor when we were dating, and she rode. But once she got pregnant, it was kind of like got to keep the
Right.
fan. But yeah, but my daughter's, she's ridden a little bit with me, and I've got a vintage Triumph Cub that, she's ridden around, and it's kind of a challenge keeping those bikes running. So it's like to get
Yeah.
her to be
Yeah.
able to use it as a commuter, but she does like to ride, and she's ridden with me since she was just a little one. So
Nice.
yeah, so yeah, it's definitely in the blood,
Did
in the
they
family
did they help
blood.
with Motoblot at all, or?
Oh yeah, it's a family business. My
Oh,
wife and
really?
daughter
Okay.
are, yeah, they believe me, they're tired of hearing about it 365 days a year. So
Yeah.
they're indoctrinated, but yeah, they're my sounding board, my wife and both my they're heavily into the music stuff, so they really help with like the
Oh, cool.
bands and all that stuff. And but yeah, I couldn't do it without them. That's for sure. I got 100% support from the family. So that's
Nice.
helpful.
Yeah, that's got to be nice to do because then, I mean, I've been around a couple events where you see the person or the people who are putting it on, and
Yeah.
you see them 1 minute, you look somewhere else, and then you look back and they're gone because they're running at 100 miles an
Yeah.
hour. So I have to imagine that has to be you for like a week straight.
Yeah, yeah, Motoblot is yeah. Hopefully, with the move to the salt shed, it'll be a little more relaxing for me because I won't have to be so much on the operations because they're already kind of built in. So that's going to
Yeah.
help.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons as I get older in years, I'm looking for easier ways to do things.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but I'm super excited about 2025. We think this is a big step forward for the event, so we're excited.
Yeah. Yeah, what's your favorite part of putting on? You know, it doesn't necessarily have to be a certain like event or section of Motoblot, but like what to you is most rewarding about putting Motoblot on?
It's it's the people, that I see year after year, and it's funny. There's people that have met at Motoblot that have gotten married,
Oh wow,
and
okay.
now now they've met at Motoblot, they got married. Now they show up, they bring their kids. It's been going on so long that we've got multiple couples that have met, got married, and have brought their kids, and just seeing, like I said, there's a community. It's a community, and
Hmm.
just seeing everybody and meeting new people because new people come in every year. Um,
Sure.
it's definitely that, just seeing people smile and being thankful that they have the opportunity to kind of come together in this
Hmm.
way. The we call them Moto family, but they're
Yeah, for sure.
they
For
like to
sure.
they like to come together, and they all see each other too. Like I said, they don't get to see each other all the time, but they all run into each other at Motoblot. So it's a big family, and
Yeah.
it's kind of regional and national. There's people that come from all over the country, and even some
Oh
people
wow.
from around the world that we
Yeah.
see year after year, and it's a reunion to a certain
Hmm.
extent.
Yeah, because I was gonna say, I mean, and my knowledge is severely limited, but I know like the Mama Tried show, I believe, is up
Absolutely,
in Milwaukee, which I'm
absolutely.
sure you've been to a few
Oh
times.
yeah, yep,
But other than that, I mean, I don't know. I don't know of too many motorcycle shows that are that large that are in this area. They seem to be on the coast or down south, or
right.
that you're kind of the only one around.
Yeah, yeah. Mama Tried is, um, Scott, who owns Fuel Cafe, and that
Hmm.
he started. Rocker Box was an event. I don't know if you know, the Rocker Box was a street festival in Milwaukee
Hmm.
that went on probably for 10 years, and it got almost too big that I think they had to shut it down because it got so big.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
and but Scott Johnson, who puts on Mama Tried, he uh, he started with Rocker Box. We started in Fuel Cafe. Like Fuel Cafe was his place, which is a motorcycle themed coffee shop
Yeah.
in Milwaukee. And then he did Rocker Box, and that became Mama Tried. That's kind of similar thing in Chicago as you evolve things. But you're right; these events like Mama Tried is awesome
Yeah.
event. It's a winter event, so it's a thing to do in the wintertime when you can't get that motorcycle riding itch because it's too cold.
Right.
We used to have the International Motorcycle Show Tour, which
I was gonna say, yeah. Yeah, that was
COVID.
here.
Yeah,
I remember I used to get my dad would take me to the IMS every
yeah,
year because it was up in Rosemont.
exactly. Yeah,
Um, and seeing all the cool new motorcycles and stuff was always fun. It was like the auto show, which is
yeah.
around, February. So anyway, at McCormick Place, but yeah, the motorcycle show was always kind of a cool thing to see. So I'm
Yeah,
kind of bummed that that's gone.
yeah, it survived until COVID basically, and then they tried to do an outdoor version of it, I think in 20 and 21, and it petered out, unfortunately.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, that was the wintertime meetup, for people in Chicago to go to the Donald Lee Stevens Convention Center in Rosemont, and
yeah,
they get like 50,000 people there. It was huge, and we would have a club booth there for the Ton Up Club and Motoblot Mods versus Rockers. We'd have like a vintage bike display, and it was
yeah,
kind of a cool thing that we kind of lost, and it hasn't really made a comeback. Hopefully, it does. I hope someone
yeah,
picks up the mantle with that and brings it back. But it was like in 10 or 12 cities every winter. That was
yeah,
kind of a cool thing
yeah.
to do.
It was cool to see, and it's funny. So because I lived out west for a while, so I was away from Chicago, and I came back in 2021. I'm like, oh, they got to still have that thing going. I'm like, damn it,
Yeah,
they don't. Like,
yeah, it's a
so
shame. Yeah, I
and it's
hope.
different. I mean, like if you're into cars, like the auto show is cool or whatever, but it's something different about like the motorcycle show.
Yeah,
I don't know if it's just because it's motorcycles or not, but it always seemed to be a lot more fun and a little less polished than the auto show is. You know what I mean?
right, right. Yeah, no, it was always a blast. Like I said, I think it's very much missed, not only in Chicago, but in all the other cities that they did it in over the winter.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping it comes. I'm actually going to Toronto for Royal Enfield because interesting enough, the motorcycle shows in Canada did survive to COVID,
Oh, really?
and they have one in like Vancouver and Toronto and Montreal and Calgary.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
they're still going strong up in Canada with those shows, but for some reason they haven't come back in the U.S. yet.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that does come back. But for
Yeah.
now, sounds like you got your hands full with Motoblot, and I'm excited to come check it out. I'm very stoked to see a show in my kind of own backyard. Really,
Yeah, yeah, no, it's exciting, and it's going to be a big one this year. We're thrilled.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Can you share maybe, I don't know how much is secret yet or anything like that or has yet to be revealed, but what's like the biggest, most exciting thing maybe that you're most excited for that that's going to be new this year?
Well, I mean, we're right now we're booking the talent. So because we're moving to the Salt Shed, which is a large live music venue,
Hmm.
that enables us to bring in bigger music acts. So I can't announce anything yet, but we're getting super close. Um, but we're going to have national music talent. Um,
Hmm.
Bands performing along with all the motorcycle stuff. So it's kind of cool. It brings together kind of like that culture. The bands we book definitely are, bands that we think that our crowd's going to like. So
Yeah.
we're going to want to bring in the right kind of music, and we're really excited about this year. So I'm really excited about the music end of it.
Hmm.
Elevating the music this year,
Yeah.
which I think is going to really help make it a big event this year.
Cool. We'll just have to wait and see. But it almost sounds like too that it's really you've almost brought like you put it in a time machine or a time capsule where it's like, it's like a snapshot of like vintage bikes because you said like vintage fashion, vintage style music. Like
Yeah.
it sounds like you're really trying to just bring us all back to that like 50s, 60s, 70s kind of
Yeah,
era.
yeah. I mean, I didn't mention, but one of the things we do is the pinup contest, which is
Okay.
it's a 40s, 50s style. Pinup
Yeah.
culture is another big part of motor culture and really hot rod culture to a certain extent. And it's the
Hmm.
same thing. It's just appreciation of that era. So, like the pinup contest is basically a vintage style pinup, and it's
Okay.
a big part. And it brings a lot of women to the event. Sometimes
Hmm.
motorcycle events can be a little overwhelming with men, and I'm
Yeah.
really excited that more and more women are getting into motorcycling, and it's more and more every year, which is awesome. But you
Yeah.
still need to like kind of like bring a little glamour and color to the event, and the
Sure.
pinup
Yeah.
contest definitely adds an extra level of cool to the
Yeah.
event.
Class up the joint a bit.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Are you seeing more and more women like ride motorcycles through Motoblot or through Royal Enfield or kind of both?
I think both. I mean, it's definitely increased over the last 20 years. I know
Hmm.
women's ridership. The numbers are could continue to uh, grow on women riders, which is fabulous. And there's
Hmm.
lots of women that are on the internet, and they're like Itchy Boots. I don't know if you've heard of her.
Yeah.
Itchy
Yeah.
Boots,
Yep.
like she's ridden all around the world,
Yeah.
sometimes on a Royal Enfield, but on other brands too. But she rode like a Himalayan from like South America, all the way to Alaska.
Yeah.
She's ridden
It's
around the
wild.
world basically.
Just
Yeah,
wild.
it's
Yeah.
just wild. Yeah, so I mean that brings more and more women into the motorcycle culture, and Royal Enfield definitely tries to reach those riders. And like I said, it's because of middleweight bikes and
Hmm.
smaller bikes, entry level riding bikes. It's important because we have to reach the new riders. I think that's one of the places the motorcycle industry is really focusing, is trying to get younger riders, new riders involved in motorcycling.
Yeah. Because I was going to say, you through Royal Enfield, you guys kind of walk the walk when it comes to that with Build Train Ride.
Yeah, build train race.
Build
Yeah,
Train Race. I'm sorry. Yeah,
yeah.
Build Trade Trade. Geez, I can't get it right. You said it, so we'll go with that.
Build train race. Yeah, no, that's a
Thank you. Yeah.
program. Yeah, it's a program that's been going on for 4 or 5 years now, I think.
Hmm.
um, and it's for women. It's women racers, and it's flat track discipline and road race discipline.
Hmm.
On 650 Royal Enfields, we have the Interceptor and the GT. So the Interceptor is kind of like the flat track um, bike, and the GT is the road race, and so it's awesome. I mean, they sign up like 10 riders a year in each um, road race and flat track, and they embrace and bring these. And so, as you know, at these races, they have the build train race category,
Yeah.
and the women get out there, and every year, man, they're getting better and more competitive and faster. It's awesome.
Yeah.
It's really cool to see.
Yeah. I was up at this was like 2 years ago. I was up at Elkhart Lake at Road America,
Yeah,
the super bike races up there, and I was looking at what they were doing first because I think the BTR racers were riding first. I was like, man, these guys are like, and they're all like really neck and neck, and I
yeah,
mean, it's cool to watch. And then I learned that they they build and work on them themselves. You can see them kind of outside on the paddock or whatever. I was like, that's super cool, you
Yeah.
know. And they're all Enfields, which I think is super cool too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
those things scream, man.
They do. No, it's really cool. Yeah, the women they build their own bikes. They they have to work within certain parameters. They can only do something. Obviously, want it to be a fair fight out there, a
Yeah,
fair
right.
race. So there's limited things they can do, but they work on their own bikes and they make sure that they're road ready and they get out there and they tear it up, man. It's pretty impressive to see. It's
Yeah, it's
pretty cool,
cool.
and it grows every year, and it does. It brings more women riders into the sport and into motorcycle racing, and
Hmm.
it's really cool.
Yeah, yeah, I thought that was really cool. I had to ask you about that. So, what else? I mean, you've been in the industry for a few decades. What else have you kind of seen? And we talked about at the beginning about what's old is new again. What kind of changes have you seen maybe over the last like 5, 10 years? And where do you think maybe motorcycling is maybe headed next, or what the next kind of trend was going to be?
Well, there's obviously the EV bike. I mean, the electric bikes
Yeah.
is kind of. I mean, it seems like to a certain extent, some people are going to be killed kicking and screaming, pulled kicking and screaming into the electric scene.
Into the
But
electric world,
I've
right?
been pretty lucky. I mean, I've had. I don't know if you've heard of Zooz, but they make like an electric bicycle. So I started on an electric
Oh,
bicycle four or
cool.
five
Yeah.
years ago,
Okay.
around Chicago, and it's so easy to get around on, right? It's like you don't have to have a light driver's license or insurance, and you can park it wherever you want,
Yeah.
and you're faster than traffic. Um, and then the motorcycles are coming out. I know Royal Enfield's got the Flying Flea that's coming soon, which is
Yeah.
their electric bike. Um, so I've had a chance to ride a lot of electric bikes. I definitely can see the future there.
Hmm.
And it's definitely coming, but a lot of people are going to be pulled kicking and screaming into that era. They don't want to give up on their internal combustion motors, and I get it
Sure.
totally. But it's definitely the future, and it's cool to see the manufacturers diversify and kind of embrace what's coming.
Sure, and I think, because I've seen a couple of, like, cars online and actually around here, that people will take old vintage cars and put electric motors in them
Yeah,
just because it's such a hassle. Like you mentioned, like, an older car or an older bike is keeping it running is so meticulous
it's a
sometimes.
challenge.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, so but if you could just plop an electric motor in there and batteries that aren't too heavy or whatever and have all the styling,
right.
and the same feel, but you're just electrically powered, I mean, that'd be pretty cool to see, so.
Yeah. No, I'm seeing that in motorcycles too. Like some of these startup motorcycle companies are embracing the vintage look,
Mhm.
but with the modern, with the electric. So it's
Yeah.
it's cool. It's neat to see that coming because obviously there's tons of advantages to electric. There's
Yeah.
also disadvantages. Like it's I think it's more dangerous because people can't hear you coming. They don't know you're
Right.
there.
Yeah.
You're completely silent, and when you're cruising around, and it's a little weird because you could rev your motor on your motorcycle to kind of let cars know that you're there, but
Right,
on
yeah,
an
everybody
electric
knows what a
bike,
motorcycle sounds like, yeah.
exactly, yeah. So it's interesting. I know it's with cars too because those cars are completely silent. So
Yeah,
people can't they don't hear you coming. So
yeah, I don't know if you've seen or, watched a Moto E event. Uh, that's
no,
really weird.
yeah.
That's like, it's like MotoGP style bikes,
Oh
but
yeah,
they're
yes,
electric, and
exactly.
there's all you hear is "Nyeh," and that's
Yeah,
it, and
yeah.
it's like a tenth of the loudness of like an actual MotoGP rig or any race
Yeah, it's
bike.
just
It's
the friction of
very
the tires on the ground, basically, and the sound of the wind. It's
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly,
it's pretty
exactly,
cool. Yeah,
so.
they're definitely doing more and more with racing on the electric side too, which is neat to see.
Yeah. So, talking about the time that you've been in the motorcycle world, seems like your passion's only just gotten stronger and now it's kind of multi-generational. What's kept motorcycles so special for you? What's kept you in the game for so long?
And I think I still love to ride, and
Yeah.
I mean it's you hear everybody say it, but it's that freedom. It's that. I mean, it's funny when I went and saw the bike riders last year with my daughter. I mean, they had the scene of them all riding across the bridge. She's ridden with me tons. I am the Distinguished Gentleman's Ride.
Oh, sure.
It almost made her cry because she's like, that's that feeling of being on the road with friends and the open road, and it's there's nothing like it. There's nothing
Yeah.
like it in the world. It's that open road feeling and riding with your friends and going places and doing things. It's pretty cool.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I think that that's a perfect note to end on. So, Fletch, thank you so much for your time and sharing some awesome motorcycle history and your story and everything. Tell me just kind of all the quick details about Motoblot, where somebody can find it, when it is, how to get a ticket to it, all that kind of stuff.
Sure. It's going to be June 27th to 29th of this year in Chicago. And it's easy to find. It's motoblot.com. So it's motoblot.com. And that's and we're on Instagram and Facebook and social media. So the website's the best place to go, but you can just Google Motoblot. That's pretty much the only thing that comes up. When I was rethinking a name, I was like, oh, I got to come up with something that no one else is going to use. So
yeah, exactly. Nobody else is using it. So.
Right, exactly. So so motoblot.com, and we're just about to announce the bands in the next couple weeks, but the dates are set. So save June 27th to the 29th for Chicago and Motoblot.
Yeah, man. It's already in my calendar, so can't wait to come check it out, and we'll talk. I hope we'll talk before then, but if we don't, we'll see you in Motoblot.
Sounds good. It's great talking to you.